On today's episode of the Stay at Home Nurse Podcast, we have a special guest. Keith Carlson, registered nurse, BSN, and CVC, is a board-certified nurse career coach, podcaster, social media influencer, motivational keynote speaker, popular career columnist, and an award-winning nurse blogger. His message of savvy career advice has been featured on Nurse.com, American Nurse Today, NursingCE.com, Multibriefs News Services, Indeed.com, and other respected platforms. Keith has logged more than 1,500 hours providing his unique brand of holistic career coaching to nurses and other healthcare professionals. During this episode, you're going to learn how Keith helps nurses to take a holistic look at their nursing career. Welcome to the Stay at Home Nurse Podcast. I'm your host, Deanna Cooper Gillingham. For over 25 years, I've strived to use my nurse credentials to find work that fit my lifestyle. Whether it was raising my 4 children and 3 fur babies, traveling the world, or moving to Mexico and living on the Caribbean Sea. Sometimes I succeeded, and sometimes I failed, but I always learned from the experience. Now, I want to help you by sharing what worked and what didn't work. There are so many opportunities out there for nurses today. The Stay at Home Nurse Podcast will inspire and equip you to have a nursing career that is meaningful and supports your lifestyle. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Stay at Home Nurse Podcast. Today we have a special treat for you. We have Nurse Keith as our guest. Could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and who you are?
Hey, my friend. Hi, Deanna. Thanks so much for having me. And I'm coming to you from Santa Fe, New Mexico, sunny Santa Fe. And I've been a nurse for 24 years, and I've been fully self-employed for 4 years, since about 2016. And I have several different things I do all under the umbrella of my business at nursekeith.com. So I'm a holistic career coach for nurses. I'm also a freelance writer and blogger. I'm a professional nurse podcaster, and I also speak on stage and do a little consulting here and there. So those are the different aspects of what I do and kind of how I show up in the world these days.
So I've had the pleasure of meeting Nurse Keith in person. We actually met at the National Nurses in Business Association, which we are both members of. And this is the first podcast guest, I believe, that I've actually met in person, so that's pretty cool. And we have a lot of things in common. You've talked about how you are involved in podcasting. I first heard you many, many, many years ago, the first nursing-related podcast. So it was kind of like a fangirl thing when I got to say, oh my gosh, I got to meet Nurse Keith. But his real name is Keith Carlson. So we will go ahead and clarify that. But I first met you as Nurse Keith, so you will always be Nurse Keith to me.
That's perfectly fine. I don't mind that moniker, really. I named myself.
Although you can talk about many topics, Keith, including entrepreneurship and podcasting, what we really want to talk about today is coaching, career coaching for nurses. Why would a nurse want to get a career coach, and what can they do for them? So let's start off with, why would a nurse want to hire a career coach?
It's a good question. Well, if an athlete wants to be really great at what he or she does, they generally wouldn't go about doing that without a coach, right? If they wanted to get to the Olympics, they'd probably have a coach to help them become the best ice skater or the best toboggan rider or whatever it happens to be. So many people in many industries have coaches to help them be accountable, to help keep them on track, to keep them focused, to help them choose the right path to get where they would like to go to achieve their goals. So a career coach is the same thing, really. And of course, we aren't taught that we need a coach to actually help us launch a career. We're actually taught that we just have to, go out in the world, get a degree, go in the job market, and then we're supposed to know what to do. But how much are we actually taught the things we need to do to be successful in a career? We're not taught that much. And for a nurse specifically, let's say a nurse is listening who's finishing an ADN degree or a BSN degree. How much time do they spend on professional development? There's probably, in my experience, when I talk to nurses, especially those just out of school, they say that they got usually an hour and a half or 2 hour seminar on resume writing and cover letter writing. So that's supposed to be their career preparation. So if you get out of school, or if you're in the middle of your career and you want to make a big change, sometimes you need a little bit of help and accountability to get where you want to go next. So that would be my not quite elevator pitch about why career coaching is important.
Okay, that's great.
That's a long elevator ride. Sorry.
Yeah, I agree with. Well, I guess we're going up the really tall building, but
Yeah, 50th floor.
Yeah, I would have to agree that we get very little to no help with that in school. And another point I think I'd like to make is we don't get taught that you can do anything other than bedside nursing in school. Very little time is taught about other aspects of nursing. And because I know you, I know that you've actually never worked in acute care at the bedside. Is that correct?
That's true. And I hear some of members of your audience gasping in horror at this very moment.
You've been a nurse for over 20 years and you've never worked inpatient at the bedside, but yet you've had a successful career and you've done quite well for yourself. I think that's probably giving a lot of hope to a lot of nurses that are out there, because we are pretty much taught you go to the bedside and you work. And if you don't do that, maybe you go to a school or a doctor's office. And those are the only options out there. So I'm thinking as a career coach, you probably, since you have done a lot of other things, everything but bedside pretty much, you can enlighten them to the other options that are out there.
I can. And when I talk to people who are graduating from nursing school, I was going to say young people, but I often have new grads or grads finishing school who are in their 40s or 50s. So it's, anywhere from early 20s up who might be finishing nursing school. So when I tell them my story, especially those who tell me, I hate acute care, I really don't want to work in med surg, I don't want to work in the hospital, I always tell them my story, that my professors and colleagues in school, my peers, said it was professional suicide to not work in med surg or a hospital first. And I actually won a commencement award for clinical excellence at graduation from my ADN program, but I didn't want to work in the hospital. It's not my happy place. And I always say, you are taking on a certain level of liability professionally if you don't get hospital experience first. You have to understand that and own that and be clear about it. I was crystal clear. I didn't care at all. And I always do things, I'm sort of a quiet rebel. I just do things differently often in my life, and often I do them backwards and sometimes upside down. It's just part of my character. So I knew what I was doing, and I knew that there were things I would not learn and not experience, but I didn't really care. And I was never unemployed for that entire 20 years of being a clinician, except a few times when I chose to not be working for a period of time. But we are not taught much about what's out there, other than, like you said, school nursing, physician's office, nurse practitioner's office, or maybe home health or hospice. We're sometimes put on rotations out there in the community too.
Right. So with the career coaching, is it basically resume help, or is it help in, what if it's a nurse that wants to go back to school, maybe an ADN nurse like myself who's thinking about going for her bachelor's or maybe straight for her master's? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, you might have noticed, and there might be a listener out there who picked up on this, or maybe many, that when I introduced myself a few minutes ago, I said holistic career coach. And the reason I say holistic career coach, it's not a buzzword for me. It means something. So pretty much not anyone, but anyone with any chops behind them, any skills behind them, can help you write a decent resume and a decent cover letter, and maybe buff up your LinkedIn profile and learn how to do that. So I totally help people with the nuts and bolts: resume, interview prep, LinkedIn profile, cover letters, networking skills. I help them with all that stuff, and I'm more than happy to. And many clients, that's all they want. However, when I say holistic career coaching, it means when I do an intake, and I have a pretty significant number of forms people fill out to become a new client, it's because I want to know who they actually are. I want to know what they do for fun, what their favorite movies are, what their favorite books are, where they like to go on vacation, the names of their children, their spouse, their dogs, their cats, their hamsters, their birds, because I want to understand their lifestyle, because I can help them write a great resume, but I can't help them make good choices if I don't know what they really want. I want to know when they were born. I want to know, have they ever taken a personality profile test? I want to know the things that they're grateful for, the things that motivate them. So I ask some fairly probing questions because I really want to understand them, because that's where I can help people make good choices based on who they are, not who some generic nurse candidate is. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And it's something that I very much believe in. When I'm not doing the Stay at Home Nurse podcast, I'm actually a case manager. And one of the things I liked about that was I like to dig really deep into my patients. I didn't want to just at the bedside worry about, make sure you got the IV and their fluid and electrolyte balance and all that stuff. I also wanted to make sure when they went home and we wrote that prescription, did they have a way to pick up the prescription? Was there somebody at home that would, be able to drive them to their doctor's appointment if they couldn't drive, and things like that, and looking at the whole person and what their motivations were, what made them happy. Just because our goal we may have a goal for our patient, it doesn't mean it's their goal. And, I've had people tell me, I just want to be able to walk my daughter down the aisle when she gets married next year.
Mm-hmm.
And that was our goal, was to get them to a place where they could do that. And so I can understand, I kind of feel like we have a kinship there, in as far as you want to do the same thing with the clients that you help with your career coaching. You don't want to just get them a job.
No.
I think probably a lot of people can get them a job. Indeed can get them a job, but you're going a little bit beyond that. So tell us about that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I can help pretty much, quote unquote, anyone get, quote unquote, a job. So we can do that. I can't be there in the interview, of course, but we can put all the pieces in place to make them the most ideal candidate possible. And then they have to go out and do it themselves, right? I wish I could be there in the interview with them. That would be awesome. Or maybe have a little teleprompter or a little speaker in their ear where I can tell them what to say. That would be really cool. Anyway, don't tell any recruiters that. Okay. So yes, when someone comes to me and they say, I'm really, really unhappy in my job or my specialty or at my particular place of employment. And I might say, well, nurses love scales of 0 to 10, right? So on a scale of 0 to 10, and I asked someone this recently, a new client, I said, how stressed are you? What's your level of duress at your job on a scale of 0 to 10? She said 8. And I said, okay, now we need to have a really serious conversation. If she had said 2, I would have said, okay, we've got some time. Let's sit back and have some, we can kind of not beat around the bush, but we can look at some other things too. But she said 8, and she felt like her work was affecting her health. The workplace culture was affecting her mental health. She felt a lot of spiritual distress. So we talked about that. And I know where to draw the line between psychotherapy or counseling and coaching. And I've been in psychotherapy most of my adult life, and I'm never shy about saying that because I think therapy is awesome. So been in it a long time, let me tell you. And there's still work to do at 56. But I'll say, okay, so we've identified this level of spiritual and emotional distress you're under. And you also just kind of hate your job and your colleagues are awful, right? So we might identify some underlying subterranean stuff that comes up from even childhood, some memory comes up. And I'm like, okay, you're taking that memory to therapy. So now let's go back and say, okay, if you can deal with that piece, now how does that affect the choices you make now? So that's part of the types of processes that we need to go through to really choose the right path, not just a path. Because someone may be choosing a particular career journey because their father is a surgeon and their mother's a CNO, and they've really influenced them, and they feel shame about not wanting to do what their parents want them to do, even if they're 37 years old. So we need to say, okay, is that really what you want? And take that father-mother stuff to therapy, but let's look at what you actually really want to do. So we dive as deep as we can without going past my scope of practice.
So, have you ever told somebody that they should leave nursing or help them to leave nursing?
I have. Yeah. I've had people come who are super, super unhappy, and nursing is not working for them. Maybe they don't want to leave healthcare. I've had a couple people leave nursing. I think I've had a few who actually let their license lapse, which I don't usually recommend. I always say, keep your license current. But some people have moved into administrative areas or research or entrepreneurship. And I've had a couple clients actually leave healthcare altogether. And I don't shame them about that, because sometimes you got to go. And I like to quote this song by Michelle Schacht. It's from, I think, her very, very first album from the 80s. And the line from that song is, "The secret to a long life is knowing when it's time to go." And it's not like when it's time to leave your life, but it's like, in terms of the stress that you experience on your body and your heart, like the metaphoric heart, and on your mind and on your relationships, the secret to a long life is making sure you know when it's time to step away and do something else, like when it's time to say no. So I help a lot of nurses learn when it's time to say no. Sometimes it's no to a bully at work. Sometimes it's no to a manager. Sometimes it's no to an employer. Sometimes it's no to a family member or friend who's pressuring them about their career. And sometimes it's a no to the voices in their head that are telling them what they're supposed to do, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. And I guess on the flip side of that, is there anybody who's ever come to you and said, I think I want to leave nursing, but then you've been able to help them to stay in the profession?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. There's someone I'm working with right now, and I think he's going to stay in nursing, but I think he's going to be making a major, major shift to a whole nother area of work. And it might end up being something administrative. It might even end up being consulting, but it's not the identity of a nurse that he doesn't mind. It's the culture of the kind of work he does. And he needs a major shift. So, and I've helped other people too who were like, I can't do this anymore. And when I quiz them about what they love, I'm like, well, do you know that thing you really like to do? Do you know that actually could be done in a nursing milieu? And sometimes they're not aware that that could happen. So I have a friend / colleague who recently got an amazing research position. And she's a nurse, and it's nursing research, but she's not a clinician anymore. And she's over the moon.
So it sounds like this is a wonderful investment. When I think of all the money we invest in our education, and then how important the job is. I mean, we spend so much time with our coworkers on the job. So many of our waking hours are spent there, and it influences our home life. And so we think nothing of, spending money on, and I always use the example because as a soccer mom at one time, you'd pay tons of money for your kids to go to soccer camp. And as a cheer mom, you'd pay tons of money for your kids to go to these things. And they're not going to, let's face it, none of my kids became soccer stars, and none of them even got a scholarship. So that money was just thrown out there on entertainment, basically.
Uh-huh.
But then when we think, it seems like we have such a hard time as nurses, I think because we're a caring profession, we have a hard time spending money on ourselves because we almost feel guilty. One of the things that I found is when I started investing in myself was that everybody else benefited from it. And it's kind of like that putting on your oxygen mask. And I know it doesn't make sense sometimes when you think about it logically, but it was like you invest money in yourself, you become happier, you can make more money, you can help you can help more people, and everybody else benefits from it. And so I think that if somebody's on the fence about getting coaching, this is something that they should seriously consider. If their work is affecting their home life, I would think that, maybe you need to talk to somebody who can help you figure out, should you be staying where you're at? Should you be going? I've had a lot of people reach out to me and say that they want to leave, but they don't know where to go. And it's like they don't want to go from the frying pan to the fire.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you help them with that? How do you help them to make sure they're going to the right place?
Well, I want to reflect first on this notion that you were just talking about, because let's say somebody spends $40,000 to get their degree. bachelor's or maybe a master's, right? And I think that's probably a ballpark figure for many people. Or let's say $30,000. And let's say they're, you know, they might choose a coaching package that's, I don't know, let's say $900, right? So they just spent 30 grand on getting their degree, but they don't know how to launch their career and make good choices. So I often will say when they say, "Oh, that seems like a lot of money," I'll say, "Well, is $900, which is less than 1/30th of what you paid for your degree, is that worth it to you to be prepared to be the ideal candidate and make really, really good choices and head in the right direction?" And sometimes if they're young people, they'll ask their parents to pay for career coaching as a graduation gift, which I think is an awesome graduation gift.
Yeah, that is.
But we also need to be able to give that gift to ourselves, right? That's
Yes.
a very, very important gift to give to ourselves. And you're right that nurses often don't want to spend money on themselves, but they'll put their kids in camp because it's not just entertainment, it's also for their wellness and their brain development, right? So we do all those things for others. And then the question you asked at the very end, I think I lost the thread. It was about can you refresh me?
I think we both probably lost that.
Probably lost the thread.
Yes. But I think you brought up a good point, and that is, if you've already invested, you're going to be paying for these student loans most likely, because most people don't pay cash for their college education anymore.
Mm-mm.
And sometimes you have to spend a little bit more to get the full value out of that you want. And not only that, I think if you're thinking about investing in a bachelor's or a master's, in our Facebook group, we have one for our case managers. And one of the questions I'll have a lot of people ask is, I'm thinking about going back for a degree. Which one should I get? Should I get a master's in this, or this? And I'm like, oh, don't waste the money until you know. Like, don't spend money on a degree until you know for sure that this is going to get you to where you want to go. So if you invest $900 or more or less on a career coach to say, yes, you are confident that this is the direction that you want to go in, and this is a good school for you. I'm assuming you would be able to help them know which school is right for them. And
Sure. And I think part of your previous question that I lost the train of thought of was about making those choices and choosing a specialty or choosing a school or choosing a degree path. And I think you're reading my mail, because I often say to people, I'm fully supportive of going after a degree if that degree is going to get you somewhere. Sometimes we go after degrees for credibility, and sometimes that's a good thing to do. Credibility is important. Like, I don't have a master's degree, and as a motivational speaker at nursing conferences, maybe having a master's, an MS after my name would add credibility, but I have not yet found a program that really lights my fire. And I am not fully convinced that spending that 30 grand or whatever is worth it yet. So I'm not convinced. And I also don't like going to school. So that's a secret about Nurse Keith that some people might already know. So yes, I can help people make those choices. And one of the ways we make choices like that, and choice is a word that keeps coming up in this podcast. Maybe we could have a little game. People we don't want to have them take shots every time we say choice, but we can have them, I don't know, put a quarter in a jar every time we say choice, and then they go out and buy themselves an ice cream, right? So anyway, I digress. So the one way we figure out if it's the right thing is we think about what is the end goal of getting that degree. And then we find people who do that thing, and we talk to those people and say, hey, so from the vantage point of where you are now, with hindsight being 2020, is that the path that you would take to get to where you are now? Was that a good path? Are you happy doing what you're doing? Was that a great program? And they might say, well, you know what? I could be doing what I'm doing, and I would have gone this direction. So that's one of the ways I help people, is to do basically what I say is career R&D. You got to do research and development, and then make the selection. See, I didn't use that other word. Make the selection of what that journey is going to be for you. The correct journey.
Yes. And one of the things that I did was I would look at people that are in different positions that I wanted to be in. And I would say, do they look happy?
Yeah.
Is this where I want to be? Would I be happy there just because they are? Do I have the same likes, dislikes, qualities, traits, strengths, and weaknesses?
Right.
And then once you figure out where you want to be, what do you need to get there? Do you need that degree? And sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. And I'm not against degrees, and I know I've done a couple podcasts that may make it seem that way, but I'm 100% not against degrees. I love education. I think it's wonderful, but I also love just-in-time learning. I like learning that's going to help me to complete a goal, learning that's going to take me somewhere. And I think sometimes we use learning as a crutch because we're doing something. When we're learning, we're doing something, but if that's something that we're doing isn't getting us somewhere that we want to get to, it doesn't matter. We're just kind of wasting our time. And I think sometimes we use it as sometimes, I don't know how to exactly explain it, but we're trying to avoid something else maybe. And by doing this, we feel like we're going in a direction because once I get that, whatever degree, then I'll be happy and then I'll be able to get a better job. But then sometimes you realize you're making 25 cents an hour more for that job. And you're like, wow, was it worth it?
Yeah. And sometimes some people feel the pressure or the need or the compulsion to collect those letters after their name. And going back to family and childhood, maybe that surgeon father, for instance, made it sort of a no-brainer that each kid had to have a higher education, and maybe the ones who achieved, doctor status, a PhD, were the ones who were truly successful. And maybe that person feels like they actually need to have a PhD to gain the approval of somebody or some invisible audience out there. So some committee in their head. And I have a friend who I made recently who has 2 PhDs in different areas. And she actually loves being a student, loves education, and really loved being a professional student for a while. And I was like, man, I wouldn't do that if someone, paid for me to go to a PhD program. I probably would not go. But I keep saying I'm gunning for an honorary doctorate. So if any, deans of nursing out there are listening and they think I've earned it, an honorary doctorate is definitely on my, that's like top of my bucket list.
We're sharing because I've always thought the same thing. Like I've written a couple books, I've done all this stuff. Can't somebody just give me the degree?
Hey, I mean, yeah, I'd love to get an honorary doctorate. So I
Keith
mention it all the
Keith
time.
and I may be standing up on stage getting our honorary doctorates together. Anybody out there that is, maybe a dean that wants to do that for us?
Yeah. It could be like Joe's University and Grill. I don't really care.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about what it looks like. You talked a little bit about intake. If somebody reaches out to you, what happens? What does that look like?
Well, the first thing we do is I send them actually quite a simple form to fill out to prepare for a complimentary consult, which is ostensibly 30 minutes, but very few are exactly 30 minutes, usually a little longer. So, and I'm a very low pressure, actually, I'm a very zero pressure salesman. So if they feel led to work with me, then they can and will. And if they don't, it's perfectly cool and they can go on their merry way. So I don't offer special deals like I'll send you an Amazon gift card if you sign up by midnight or anything. It's like if someone feels that the energy is right, then they're going to sign up to work with me, and they can decide on the spot, which some people do. Some might call me or email me the next week or sometimes a year later and say, okay, I'm ready now. So once that happens, I send them an email with online forms that I talked about to fill out, which do help them take a pretty in-depth look at themselves. And I'm looking to actually expand that. And then we start. And it doesn't have to be like a series of 1-hour calls. Sometimes their calls are shorter. Some people's brains, it's like after 25 or 30 minutes, they're like, okay, I'm done. I can't talk anymore. So sessions can be all different lengths. And we work on all sorts of things. And it can be video, FaceTime, Zoom, Skype, telephone, tin can and string, whatever works for them. I've also offered coaching by telepathy, but no one's really taken me up on it yet.
When they do, let us know. That'll be a very interesting episode. We can
Great
definitely
way to
talk
make
about that.
money.
Yeah.
That'd be an easy way to make money.
Yeah.
I know when I've gone through coaching before for a variety of different things, just going through if a good coach has a really good intake form that as you're going through there, you're realizing a lot of things about yourself.
Yeah.
And if you don't feel like by going through that, sometimes you can gain so much insight just by the questions that they ask and making you think about different things about what you really do want and, different things like that. But so I think that that's probably just the initial intake form and going through your initial call is probably worth the money, but I'm sure that you offer a lot more than that. That's the next question I want to ask. How long do you usually coach somebody for? Is this a one and done? Is this a 3-month commitment, 6-month commitment? What do you usually do?
I have different types of packages. The one that most people utilize right now is called my Flex package, which is basically 4 hours of coaching, but that doesn't necessarily mean 4 1-hour calls. And part of that 4 hours might be me doing some editing of their resume for them, though I prefer they do it themselves and I just kind of guide them. That's what I prefer. Sometimes people are like, would you just write it for me, please? So I'll do that, which is not my favored way because I like people to learn. It's better to teach a person to fish rather than just like handing them a fish, right? So my clients who tend to be really successful with coaching are the kinds of people who will be in touch with me all the time. They can email me every day if they want. And no one abuses that. There's some people who like to have that lifeline. And what that happens, what that sets up is that when we get on a call, they're not catching me up on what's happened in the last 10 days. I already know. So the call ends up being sort of a punctuation mark within this ongoing conversation that's been going on electronically. And that's how I most prefer to do my coaching, where there's this thread that continues and there's not a whole lot of, we don't have to spend a lot of time on story because that's not a good use of the client's time. So that 4 hours could stretch over a month or sometimes even 2 months if we do a lot of small segments of coaching. And then sometimes some people like email-based coaching where we just have a quick call at the beginning of each month and then everything is written because they don't really need the conversation so much. And then I have packages that are LinkedIn coaching, which is very not one and done, but it's just a couple calls, usually over Zoom, sharing screens, and we get their LinkedIn really shiny and looking great, and I teach them how to use it. So there's all different. I can really customize things to a person's needs. I don't do what I do is not very cookie cutter.
And I think that's probably why it's so successful because you really care about the person and not just trying to get people into a certain job. LinkedIn is something that I think is very underutilized by nurses.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're on LinkedIn, you will get job offers all the time just for being there and being a nurse. And if you're not on LinkedIn and you are and it shouldn't be used once you decide that you want another job, you should be on LinkedIn while you're happy at your job and while you're posting the things that you're doing at your job, maybe a project that you're working on. And I'm a novice at LinkedIn compared to Keith. I mean, I have an okay profile, but he really knows how to make that work for you. So I'm sure that if you're not on LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn. And if it scares you, you need to reach out to Keith.
Right. And just before we go, I just want to say that LinkedIn, people see it as social media. It's actually a search engine disguised as social media. The search engine part is what's really most important about it. So people are there to see and be seen and to find and be found. And recruiters hang out there too. And I've even heard recruiters say sometimes they'll hold some jobs back and they do headhunting on LinkedIn. They look for people. And because it's a search engine, it runs on keywords. So your profile needs to be maximized with the keywords for which you want to be recognized. And you can flag your profile to recruiters that you're open to work. There's ways to do that electronically. And it's also a great way, like I said, if you want to research whether taking this master's degree path is the right one to get where you want to go, LinkedIn's a great way to find people who do the thing that you're thinking of wanting to do and reaching out to them and saying, hey, are you happy with what you're doing? And how'd you get there? And one hint I'll give you, one little nugget is that you can email people on LinkedIn, and you can be a little limited by if you don't have premium LinkedIn and spend the $600 a year for it, which can be worth it for some of us. But what I'll say is that in these days, in the 21st century, think about how many emails people get, right? We get hundreds and hundreds a day, most of us,
I
sometimes
spend
thousands.
so much time just delete
Me too.
every day.
Or respond. So I often say, if you find somebody on LinkedIn who seems like a high value contact who you really want to get to know because they might have the key to something for you, you know their name, you know their credentials, you know where they work. So you're not going to go stalk them because we're in the pandemic, and also that's just not cool. So send them an actual letter in the mail written to them with your resume in there too. Don't ask them for a job, but introduce yourself. And so how many people out there in the world get a letter in the mail from somebody who thinks what they do is really cool and they want to meet them? I mean, very, very few.
I can't think of that ever happening in this modern age since email has come around. It's just not something that's done.
Yeah, so you will stand out if you go old school. You might have to go buy a stamp in an envelope. They're still available. I think it's a really good, really awesome, unique way to do some networking. Yeah. Send a letter in the mail. It'll catch somebody's eye.
And it's funny that you mentioned that. I had a business coach one time who sent out a magazine, a physical magazine. And the reason he did that is because he said he wanted to come into our homes every month and make sure that we saw him. And that was his way of, by sending that magazine every month, we were reminded. And that's what you do when you send a letter. Like all of a sudden it's on their desk. It's not hidden in an email on their computer. It's actually physically sitting there on their desk where they have to pick it up and move it. And they're reminded all the time of you. And so I love that. Something physical versus something virtual in this day and age that we're so used to everything virtual now.
It's so true. And I know we both have things to do and people to see and people to talk to, but you know, this has been really wonderful, and I love chatting with you. And if anyone wants to reach out to me and say that they heard me on your show, instead of a 30-minute complimentary consult, they'll get 45. They just have to mention Deanna 45, and then they'll get a little extra time on a complimentary consult.
Oh, that's really awesome. Thank you. I'm sure our listeners are thanking you too. So we're going to wrap it up now. And Keith and I could talk forever, but we're not going to. But maybe we'll have him back on a future podcast episode where we could talk about something like maybe entrepreneurship or go a little deeper into LinkedIn. If there's something that you would like to talk about or you'd like to hear us talk about, go ahead and let us know. Send me a email at hello@thestayathomenurse.com, and we will go ahead and get that on the books. And until next time, as Keith likes to say, adios from
beautiful Santa Fe, New Mexico.
And adios from Port Aventuras, Mexico.